She followed him out of suspicion, but when the CEO saw the janitor's daughter run into his arms, she realized this wasn't about curiosity anymore. It was about a love she never expected. Hello family, if you're ready for the full story, make sure you hit subscribe, and tell me in the comments where in the world you're watching from. Tomorrow, I've got another story that will blow your mind, and trust me, you don't want to miss it. Now let's dive in. The city glowed beneath the night sky, all steel and glass, a symphony of lights humming like a restless machine. From the top floor of a corporate tower, Victoria Hale stared down at it all through walls of glass that doubled as mirrors. Power had been her currency for years, and she wore it like armor, a tailored suit, hair pinned in place, every word calculated to command a room. But when the last assistant left and silence swallowed her corner office, she stood alone in her kingdom. The skyline stretched before her, glittering and cold. For the 1000th time, she asked herself if this was what winning was supposed to feel like. Her phone buzzed, another calendar reminder. Another meeting. Another deal. No messages that mattered. Not a single voice waiting to ask how her day went. Victoria closed her eyes, breathing in the sterile hum of the air conditioning. Success echoed loudly, but it was the kind of echo that only reminded you no one else was listening. At the other end of town, fluorescent lights flickered inside Will Carter's world. The elementary school was empty now, its hallways stretched long and hollow, decorated with crayon-colored posters and the faint smell of floor wax. Will pushed his mop along the tiles, his back aching, his shoulders weary. He whistled softly, not for himself but to fight the quiet. Cleaning classrooms at night wasn't glamorous, but it paid just enough to keep food on the table and a roof over their heads. And for Will, that was enough, because at home, waiting in a small second-floor apartment, was Lily, his 7-year-old daughter. As he emptied a trash can full of construction paper scraps, his phone buzzed in his pocket. He wiped his hands on his work pants and answered, "Daddy." The little voice was bright, filled with a kind of joy that no paycheck could buy. Will's lips broke into a tired smile. "Hey, Bug. Did you brush your teeth yet?" "Yes. Twice, because I want them extra shiny when you get home." "Good. I'll be there soon. Did you do your reading?" A guilty giggle. "Maybe you can read to me when you get here?" Will chuckled, leaning against his mop. "Deal. One story before bed. Pinky promise." He slipped the phone back into his pocket, his chest tight with love. The exhaustion didn't matter. Every sweep of the mop, every trash bag tied, every polished hallway was for her. Lily was his reason, his world. Victoria's reason was different. The following morning, she was back at the school, not because she belonged there, but because her company had been sponsoring an educational program. She gave her rehearsed speech to a group of teachers and administrators, her voice polished and precise. Applause followed, hands shook, smiles plastered across faces. But as she walked the hall, her eyes caught a figure kneeling by the lockers, fixing a loose hinge. The janitor. He didn't notice her at first. His shirt sleeves were rolled up, forearms streaked with dust, a streak of sweat along his temple. When he did look up, their eyes met. For a split second, she thought she saw something, dignity maybe, or just the stubborn pride of someone who worked hard without expecting recognition. He nodded politely and went back to his work. No fawning, no attempt to impress. Just focus. It was unusual. Most people in her presence tried to prove something. This man didn't. He simply existed, steady and unbothered. That night, back in her penthouse, Victoria caught herself thinking of him. A janitor. She shook her head, poured herself a glass of wine, and told herself it was nothing. Meanwhile, Will returned home long after dark. Lily was still awake, sitting cross-legged on the couch in her pajamas, clutching a book. "You're supposed to be asleep, young lady," Will said, dropping his work bag by the door. "You promised," she countered, holding up the book. Her grin melted every ounce of frustration. He sighed with mock defeat and scooped her up, settling her onto his lap. As his voice filled the room with the story of a brave knight and a hidden princess, Lily leaned against him, her eyelids heavy but her smile wide. In that small apartment, with its peeling wallpaper, second-hand furniture, and warmth only love could bring, Will wasn't just a janitor. He was everything his daughter needed. Back in the glass tower, Victoria stared at her empty dining table, set for one. She switched on the TV for noise, but didn't hear a word. Her eyes drifted to the window, down to the city where people like Will lived lives she barely understood. Two worlds. One glittering, one humble. Both filled with silence. Both aching for something more. And though they didn't know it yet, those worlds were on a collision course. Do you think love can truly cross the barriers of wealth and class? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear your take before the story unfolds. Victoria wasn't sure when the idea first took root. Maybe it was that quick glance in the school hallway, the way the janitor had looked at her without a trace of intimidation. Or maybe it was the memory of him talking softly on his phone, a hint of a smile flickering across his face like he was holding onto something precious. She told herself it was nothing. Just idle curiosity. But that curiosity gnawed at her, whispering questions she couldn't silence. Why did he rush out of the school every night like a man racing against the clock? Who was on the other end of that phone call that softened his otherwise rugged face? Victoria wasn't used to questions she couldn't answer. She had built her life on control, of markets, of people, of outcomes. Curiosity was a luxury, one she hadn't allowed herself in years. Yet here she was, sitting in her sleek black car outside the school parking lot, engine humming quietly, watching as the janitor pushed through the side doors with his worn backpack slung over one shoulder. Her assistant would have been horrified if she knew. The CEO of Hale Enterprises, lurking in a parking lot after hours, following a janitor? Absurd. Reckless. But something in Victoria resisted the dismissal. Something inside her wanted to know. So she turned off her headlights, waited until his pickup truck pulled out of the lot, and then, keeping a careful distance, she followed. The drive was long enough to remind her just how far his world was from hers. The shiny towers of the financial district melted into dimmer streets lined with diners and laundromats, then into neighborhoods where chain-link fences leaned tiredly and the paint on houses peeled from years of weather. Victoria gripped the wheel tighter. It wasn't judgment she felt, but a strange unease. For so long, she had measured people by their resumes, their polished shoes, the weight of their handshakes. Now she was following a man whose resume she had never seen, whose handshake she had never shaken, but whose quiet existence had managed to tug at her attention in a way nothing else had. Will's truck finally pulled into a small apartment complex, 3 stories, paint faded, balconies cluttered with bicycles and potted plants. His headlights clicked off, and for a moment, Victoria almost started her car again, ready to leave. She had invaded enough of his privacy. What was she doing here, anyway? But then, the front door of the building swung open. A little girl burst out, her ponytail bouncing, her pajamas decorated with tiny stars. She squealed with delight and sprinted across the small courtyard. "Daddy!" Victoria froze. The janitor, Will, dropped his bag and crouched low, arms open wide. His entire face transformed. The lines of exhaustion melted away, replaced by pure joy. When the little girl leapt into his embrace, he caught her effortlessly, spinning her once in the air before holding her close. The sound of his laugh drifted across the courtyard. Not tired. Not weary. But full. Whole. Alive. Victoria's breath caught. From the safety of her car, she watched, unable to turn away. The little girl pressed her cheek to his, whispering something that made him smile wider. He carried her inside, one arm supporting her, the other holding her tiny backpack like it was treasure. Victoria's chest tightened, something foreign pressing against her ribs. She had sat in boardrooms with men worth billions, dined in restaurants with senators, traveled the world on private jets. None of it had ever made her feel the way this simple scene did: a father, a daughter, and a kind of love she realized she had never truly seen up close. It wasn't polished. It wasn't practiced. It wasn't a performance. It was real. Inside the apartment, Lily chattered excitedly as Will set her down. Victoria couldn't hear the words, but she could see the joy in the girl's movements, the way she tugged at his hand, pulling him toward a table cluttered with crayons and math worksheets. Will sat down heavily in the chair, still wearing his work clothes, and leaned in to listen to every word she said. He smiled, he nodded, he laughed at her stories. When she held up a drawing of what looked like a princess with messy brown hair, Will kissed the paper as though it were the Mona Lisa itself. Victoria's throat tightened. The CEO who had built her empire on endless deals and flawless contracts felt something she couldn't quite name. Envy? Admiration? Regret? She had money, power, status. But this man, this janitor, had something she didn't. Something she had secretly longed for but never dared admit. Connection. Time slipped by. She didn't realize how long she'd been sitting there until her car's engine hummed warningly, as if reminding her she didn't belong. Victoria finally tore her gaze away. Her hand trembled slightly as she shifted the car into drive. On the way back to her penthouse, she didn't notice the glowing towers or the glittering skyline. All she saw in her mind was a little girl's arms thrown around her father's neck. All she heard was his laughter, unpolished, unguarded, the kind of sound that didn't echo in empty penthouses or sterile boardrooms. And though she didn't yet understand why, she knew one thing with startling clarity: this wasn't just curiosity anymore. Something inside her had shifted. If you were in Victoria's shoes, would you have followed him that night? Or would you have ignored your curiosity? Let me know in the comments. I'm curious how you'd react. The next morning, Victoria Hale was back in her glass tower, but her mind wasn't where it was supposed to be. Numbers blurred on the financial reports her assistant slid across the desk. Stock market trends, partnership contracts, quarterly goals, all of it floated past her like meaningless chatter. Her pen hovered over the dotted line of a seven-figure deal, but instead of signing, she found herself sketching absent shapes in the margin: loops, circles, an absent-minded spiral that tightened until the ink smudged. "Ma'am?" her assistant asked cautiously. Victoria blinked, straightened, and placed the pen firmly on the paper. "Leave it with me. I'll review it later." The young woman hesitated, clearly startled. Victoria never postponed decisions. She was the kind of CEO who closed deals mid-flight, who signed contracts without glancing at the clock. But today, the smallest hesitation exposed the crack in her armor. And that crack had a name. Will Carter. At the elementary school, Will tried to shake off the strange heaviness that clung to him. The night before had been perfect: Lily's hug, her giggle, the way she'd fallen asleep with her tiny hand gripping his shirt. But something gnawed at the edges of his peace, an invisible presence he couldn't name. While mopping the gym floor that morning, he caught himself glancing at the doors, as though expecting someone to walk in. He told himself it was just routine. Just another day. But when he emptied the trash cans in the teacher's lounge, he overheard hushed voices. "Did you see her yesterday?" The CEO herself came in, Victoria Hale. "She's terrifying in the best way. She's practically untouchable. The kind of woman who probably has bodyguards just to hold her umbrella." They laughed, and Will forced a smile, but the words lodged in his chest. He thought about her. The way she'd walked the halls with that cool grace, eyes sharp and unreadable. And then he thought of his own life: dusty classrooms, mops and bleach, and a daughter who asked if they could have pizza every Friday like her friends at school. What could a woman like Victoria Hale ever see in a man like him? The thought was ridiculous. And yet, he couldn't shake it. Victoria sat in her office hours later, her reflection on the glass wall staring back at her. The reflection didn't look like a woman in control. It looked restless. Why had she followed him? Why had she sat in that car, watching like some stranger in the night? She told herself it had been a lapse in judgment, a whim. But the truth was more dangerous. She had seen something she couldn't unsee. The memory of that little girl racing into Will's arms hit her with unexpected force. The way his laugh had filled the air, warm and unguarded. It had stirred something inside her, a hollow space she had spent years burying under board meetings and conference calls. And she hated it. Not the moment. No, she had loved the moment. She hated the vulnerability it left behind. That week, Victoria avoided the school, delegating meetings to junior executives. She told herself she was too busy, too important. She convinced herself that seeing him again would undo the careful distance she needed to restore. At the same time, Will avoided her too. When he saw her car parked outside the school one morning, sleek and black among the teachers' minivans, he ducked into the supply closet until she had gone inside. He walked the long way around the building to avoid the front office where she sometimes stopped to speak with the principal. He kept his head down, his pace steady, his eyes trained on the floors he was paid to clean. But avoidance only sharpened the tension. One evening, Will came home late. Lily was already asleep on the couch, her tiny hand clutching a stuffed rabbit, her lips parted in quiet dreams. He knelt beside her, brushing a strand of hair from her face. She murmured something unintelligible, and his heart clenched. In the quiet, he whispered, "I'll give you the world, Bug. Somehow, someway." But the promise tasted bitter. Because he knew he couldn't. Not the kind of world other kids had. Not the kind of life he used to dream of before life had pulled the ground from under him. And then, unwanted, uninvited, the image of Victoria flashed in his mind. Her sharp eyes, her perfectly controlled posture, her power. The kind of life she represented. The kind of life he would never touch. He pushed the thought away, kissed his daughter's forehead, and carried her to bed. At nearly the same hour, Victoria sat in her penthouse, a glass of wine untouched beside her. The city sprawled beneath her like a jewel, but she felt no pride in it tonight. Her phone buzzed with a message from a colleague. Dinner tomorrow? French place on 5th. She stared at it. She could go. She could laugh politely, sip expensive wine, discuss mergers and profits. She could fill the silence with business, as she always had. But the thought of it drained her. Instead, her mind wandered back to the janitor. To the way his face had lit up at the sight of his daughter. To the sound of his laugh, real in a way most of her life wasn't. She hated herself for thinking of him. Hated the longing in her chest. But the truth whispered anyway. Maybe, just maybe, she wanted to be the one who made someone look at her like that. Days turned into a week. They didn't speak. They barely even crossed paths. But the silence between them was alive, buzzing with everything unspoken. When Victoria's driver pulled up to the school for another board-related event, her chest tightened. She told herself it was nerves, though she hadn't felt nervous in years. Will saw her from the end of the hall that afternoon, her heels clicking against the polished tiles, her hair shining under the fluorescent lights. He quickly ducked into a classroom, pretending to rearrange chairs. Their avoidance was almost comical, if it hadn't hurt so much. Because beneath the silence, both knew the truth. Something had shifted the night she followed him. And no matter how hard they resisted, no matter how much they told themselves it was impossible, something in them both refused to let go. It started with rain. The kind of storm that rolled in without warning, drumming against the school's wide windows and flooding the sidewalks within minutes. Teachers hurried children to waiting cars, umbrellas bloomed like frantic flowers, and the principal barked orders into his phone about rescheduling the fundraiser that had just begun. Victoria Hale, dressed immaculately as always, had been at the school for that fundraiser. Her company had pledged a sizable donation for new classroom technology, and she had promised to make a rare personal appearance. But the weather had other plans. The event ended early, leaving her stranded in the gymnasium while her driver battled gridlocked streets outside. The gym smelled faintly of popcorn and wet coats. Balloons sagged, the sound system crackled with static, and folding tables stood abandoned. Victoria sat stiffly in a metal chair, checking her watch, irritated that her carefully managed schedule had been derailed by something as trivial as weather. And then she saw him. Will Carter, mop in hand, moving quietly between puddles forming at the gym entrance where soaked parents had trailed water inside. His shirt clung to his shoulders, damp from hauling supplies to a leaking storage room. He hadn't noticed her yet, too focused on wringing out his mop. Victoria's chest tightened. Of all the people she could be stuck with tonight, it had to be him. Will finally looked up. Their eyes met. For a moment, both froze. He was the first to break it, dipping his head politely. "Ms. Hale." His voice was steady, but his grip on the mop handle betrayed his nerves. "Mr. Carter." She kept her tone cool, professional, though the echo of his laughter from that night still haunted her. He gestured vaguely toward the door. "Storm's not letting up. Roads are a mess." "I'm aware," she replied curtly. Silence stretched between them. Only the rain filled it, hammering against the roof, a relentless reminder that neither of them was going anywhere soon. Minutes passed. Will kept working, mop swishing rhythmically across the floor. Victoria pretended to scroll through her phone, but her eyes kept flicking toward him. The way he worked, steady, methodical, not hurried or careless, was strangely grounding. Finally, she spoke. "You don't have to do that right now." He paused, raising an eyebrow. "If I don't, the floor gets slippery. Last thing the school needs is a lawsuit." There was no deference in his tone, no attempt to impress her. Just quiet logic. Victoria blinked. She was used to people tripping over themselves to sound agreeable in her presence. His bluntness caught her off guard. "You take your job seriously," she said, more softly than she intended. Will gave a half shrug, dipping the mop again. "Someone's gotta." The storm rumbled outside, thunder shaking the windows. The lights flickered once, twice, then steadied. Victoria shifted uncomfortably in her chair. "You live far from here?" she asked, surprising even herself. He hesitated before answering. "Close enough. 15 minutes when traffic's good." His eyes flicked toward her, then back down. "You? Downtown? That's different." His lips twitched like he almost smiled. She studied him. "You say that like it's a bad thing." Will leaned on the mop handle, meeting her gaze fully for the first time. "Not bad. Just different. Worlds apart, really." The words stung more than she expected. Because he was right. The silence after that wasn't empty. It was thick, charged with everything neither dared say. Victoria set her phone aside. "Do you enjoy it?" "Enjoy what?" "Your work." He let out a breath, considering. "Enjoy? Not exactly. But it's honest. Pays the bills." His jaw tightened. "Lets me take care of my daughter. That's what matters." There it was again, that flash in his eyes, the transformation she had seen that night. His entire being softened at the mention of her. "You're raising her alone," Victoria said quietly. It wasn't a question, but he nodded. "Since she was 2. Something in her chest ached. She wanted to ask more, but stopped herself. His shoulders had already tensed, the wall going back up. The gym door banged open, startling them both. A janitor's cart rattled in, pushed by another staff member, who muttered something about a broken window in the library. Will excused himself quickly, grateful for the distraction. Victoria watched him leave, her pulse unsteady. She should have been relieved, the awkwardness was over. But instead, she felt the strangest sense of disappointment. When Will returned 20 minutes later, the rain was still coming down in sheets. Victoria was still there, sitting in the same chair, arms crossed tightly over her chest as though holding herself together. He hesitated, then spoke. "Driver not here yet?" She shook her head. "Traffic's frozen." Another silence. Finally, he sighed, setting his mop aside. "Look, you don't have to just sit there. Want some coffee? Teacher's lounge still has some left, I think." She almost refused. Coffee from a dusty lounge pot was worlds beneath her usual standards. But something in his tone stopped her. Not pity, not obligation. Just kindness. "All right," she said softly. The teacher's lounge was small, cluttered with posters, mismatched mugs, and the faint smell of old chalk. Will poured her a cup, sliding it across the counter. She wrapped her fingers around it, surprised at how grounding the warmth felt. "You don't smile much," he remarked suddenly. Victoria blinked. "Excuse me." "Nothing," he muttered quickly, as if regretting the words. "Just, when you do, it changes the whole room. Not many people can do that. Her breath caught. No one had ever spoken to her like that. Not as a CEO, not as a leader. Just as a woman. She lowered her gaze, lips pressing into a line, afraid her face would betray the strange rush inside her. The rain didn't stop for hours. They talked about nothing at first. The leaky roof in the gym. The stubborn copy machine in the office. Slowly, though, the walls lowered. She admitted she hated silence at home. He admitted he sometimes fell asleep in Lily's room, just so she wouldn't feel alone. By the time her driver finally called to say the roads were clear, Victoria realized she didn't want the night to end. But it had to. As she rose to leave, she glanced back at him. His shirt was damp, his hands calloused, his smile tired but real. He didn't belong to her world, and she didn't belong to his. And yet, for the first time in years, she felt like she had been exactly where she needed to be. Do you believe fate sometimes forces us into situations we'd normally avoid, just to show us what we're missing? Tell me in the comments. I'd love to know your take. The rain had long passed, but the storm inside them lingered. Days slipped by in a fragile rhythm. Neither Will nor Victoria admitted it, but that night in the teacher's lounge had changed something. They weren't strangers anymore. They weren't quite friends, either. But an invisible thread connected them now, tugging when their eyes met in the halls, tightening when their words brushed against something real. And then came the night the thread pulled taut. The school had hosted its annual family reading night, where parents and children gathered in the library to share stories. Tables overflowed with picture books, laughter echoed between the shelves, and the scent of hot chocolate lingered in the air. Will was there with Lily, who proudly tugged him toward every story station. Her pigtails bounced as she read aloud, her tiny finger trailing under each word. Teachers clapped. Other parents smiled. Victoria had been invited too, though her presence was meant more as a sponsor than a participant. She had slipped in late, standing near the back, unnoticed. But her eyes found Will instantly, kneeling beside his daughter, beaming as though nothing else in the world existed. Something in her cracked. Again. Later, when the families trickled out, Will stayed behind to help clean up. Lily had fallen asleep in a beanbag chair, clutching a book to her chest. Victoria lingered too, almost against her will. When their eyes met, the silence said what neither dared to voice. We're not done here. She approached slowly. She's remarkable. He followed her gaze to Lily, pride softening his features. Yeah, she is. Victoria hesitated, then asked the question that had been gnawing at her since that rainy night. Her mother. Will stiffened. The mop in his hands froze mid-swipe. For a long moment, he didn't answer. Finally, he leaned against the handle, his shoulders heavy. She left. Lily was too. Said she wasn't ready to be a mother. Packed a bag and disappeared. Haven't seen her since. Victoria's breath caught. The bluntness, the pain hidden under calm words, it was like a blade wrapped in cloth. She just left you? Us, he corrected quietly. She left us. His voice cracked on the word. Victoria didn't know what to say. Her world was built on people who chased power, who abandoned anything that slowed them down. But this, abandoning a child, was something she couldn't fathom. Will forced a smile, though it didn't reach his eyes. I stopped asking why a long time ago. Figured Lily deserved someone who showed up every day, not someone who couldn't. He glanced at his sleeping daughter, voice softening. I don't get everything right. But I try. That's all I can do. Victoria swallowed hard. For years, she had measured worth by achievements, wealth, headlines. But here was a man measuring his by bedtime stories and pinky promises. And somehow, it felt infinitely greater. The air between them shifted. Will looked at her, his eyes searching. What about you? Victoria blinked. Me. You show up here a lot for someone who doesn't have kids. Why? She froze. The question sliced through her polished exterior, exposing the hollowness she had tried to bury. She turned toward the window, away from his gaze. Because this place reminds me of what I never had. Will waited, silent but steady. My parents weren't parents, she admitted at last. They were investors. Socialites. I was an accessory in their world, not a daughter. Nannies raised me. Tutors kept me busy. I went to schools like this, but never belonged to them. Children would laugh, run, share secrets. I watched from a distance. Her throat tightened. So I built something of my own. A company. A name. A reputation. If I couldn't belong to a family, I belonged to a legacy. The words left her lips like broken glass, sharp and painful. Will's face softened. But you're still watching from a distance. She turned, startled by his accuracy. Silence pressed heavy between them. Lily stirred in the beanbag, mumbling something in her sleep. Victoria's chest ached. She wanted to reach out, to hold the child, to feel what it was like to be needed, not for her money, not for her power, but simply for being there. I don't know how to, she stopped, clenching her jaw. Vulnerability was foreign, almost terrifying. How to what? Will asked gently. How to let someone in without losing myself. The confession slipped out before she could stop it. And once it was out, she couldn't take it back. Will set the mop aside and stepped closer. Not too close, just enough that she could feel the steadiness radiating from him. You don't lose yourself, he said quietly. You find the parts you didn't know were missing. Her breath caught. No one had ever spoken to her like that, without agenda, without expectation. Just truth. But truth could be dangerous. Because it made her want things she wasn't supposed to want. That night, after she finally left the school, Victoria lay awake in her penthouse bed. The city lights glowed outside her window, but all she could see was Lily's sleeping face, Will's tired smile, and the aching hollowness in her chest. At the same time, Will sat on the edge of his daughter's bed, tucking her in. He whispered, "Sweet dreams, Bug," then lingered, staring at the ceiling. He thought of Victoria, the way her voice had cracked when she spoke of her parents, the vulnerability she'd tried so hard to hide. They were both broken in different ways. And maybe, just maybe, they were the missing pieces of each other's puzzle. But neither dared say it aloud. Not yet. Do you think sharing our painful truths makes us stronger, or just more vulnerable to being hurt? Drop your thoughts in the comments. This is where it gets real. The week after family reading night felt different. For the first time in years, Victoria caught herself lingering in the mornings, staring too long at her reflection before leaving for work. She wore softer colors to the school visits, her heels quieter, her expression less severe. She told herself it was strategy, appear more approachable to the teachers, align her image with community engagement. But when her eyes found Will Carter pushing his mop through the halls, she knew better. It began with small conversations. "Good morning," she offered one day as he wiped down the cafeteria tables. He glanced up, surprised. "Morning." Her gaze flicked to the tray of untouched chocolate chip cookies the lunch staff had left behind. She hesitated, then picked one up. "Do these taste as bad as they look?" Will smirked faintly. "Worse." But she bit into it anyway, grimacing at the chalky texture. His chuckle followed, low and warm, and something in her chest fluttered. The next day, he surprised her. "You drink coffee, right?" he asked, holding out a steaming cup from the teacher's lounge machine. She arched a brow. "Is that safe for human consumption?" "Depends on the definition of safe." His grin widened when she accepted it anyway, taking a cautious sip. The coffee was terrible. But the moment wasn't. Then came the day of the broken photocopier. Victoria had stayed after school for a meeting with the principal, only to discover her carefully prepared documents had jammed inside the old machine. She stood there in her tailored suit, glaring at the blinking red light, jabbing buttons without success. Will walked in, mop bucket squeaking behind him. "Looks like it's winning," he remarked. She crossed her arms. "Machines should do what they're told." "Tell that to my washing machine. It's been rebelling for years." Her lips twitched despite herself. She stepped aside reluctantly. "Think you can fix it?" "Depends. Does sweet-talking count as fixing?" To her shock, he bent over the copier, tapping it like an old friend. "Come on, buddy. Just one more job, then you can rest." The machine whirred, spat out the papers, and fell silent. Victoria blinked. "You're joking." "See? Sweet talk works." She laughed, really laughed, for the first time in weeks. The sound startled even her. After that, the thread between them grew stronger. One afternoon, Victoria found herself in the library. Watching will help Lily choose books. He crouched low, his large hands gently guiding her tiny fingers over the spines. This one, Lily declared, holding up a book about a lion who couldn't roar. Will grinned. You sure? Pretty heavy stuff. I'm brave, she insisted, puffing out her chest. Victoria's lips curved before she could stop them. Brave indeed. Lily spotted her then. You're the lady who gave our school the computers. Victoria froze, unprepared for the child's wide-eyed attention. Yes. That was me. Thank you. Lily launched forward and hugged her legs without hesitation. Victoria stiffened. No one touched her like that, unscheduled, uninvited. But the little girl's warmth seeped through her guarded armor. For a moment, she stood frozen, then slowly, her hand lowered to stroke Lily's hair. When Will caught her eye, his expression was unreadable. But something flickered there. Something she both craved and feared. That night, Victoria couldn't sleep. The memory of Lily's hug replayed over and over, colliding with the echo of Will's chuckle, the way his eyes softened when he looked at his daughter. She had spent years building walls. Yet somehow, this janitor and his little girl were finding the cracks. And she didn't want to stop them. Their bond solidified one Friday evening. The storm had knocked out power in half the city, and the school had been forced to cancel its aftercare program. Parents scrambled to pick up their kids, but Victoria, who had been in a meeting, found herself trapped by the blackout. The hallways were lit only by emergency lights. Voices echoed as families rushed out. And then in the near dark, she heard laughter, bright and fearless. She followed the sound to the gym, where Lily was playing tag with two other children, her giggles bouncing against the high walls. Will sat on the bleachers, watching with an expression so tender it nearly undid Victoria. She joined him, almost without thinking. Doesn't she ever run out of energy? Victoria asked. Will smirked. She's got an endless supply. I borrow some when I'm running low. They watched in silence for a moment. She loves you, Victoria murmured. He turned his head toward her. She's my whole world. And you're hers. The words slipped out before she could stop them. His eyes darkened, something unspoken simmering beneath the surface. As the children's parents arrived and collected them, only Lily remained. When she finally tired out, she ran to her father, climbing into his lap. Can we stay a little longer, Daddy? Will kissed the top of her head. For a bit. Victoria watched them, her chest aching. She wanted to be part of that warmth, to feel what it meant to be chosen, not for her success, not for her wealth, but simply for being there. For the first time in her life, she wondered if love could be simple. Later that night, when Will walked her to the parking lot, neither spoke much. The air between them was charged, full of words unsaid. Finally, as she reached her car, Victoria turned to him. You're a good father, she said softly. He swallowed hard, his jaw tightening. I try. She hesitated, then added, and you're a good man. The words lingered in the cool night air, heavier than either expected. For a heartbeat, it felt like the world stopped. That night, in their separate homes, both lay awake, he in his small apartment with his daughter snuggled close, she in her towering penthouse overlooking the city. And both thought the same dangerous thought. What if this isn't impossible after all? Do you believe small moments, like laughter, a hug, or a shared cup of coffee, can spark the deepest bonds? Comment with your own experience. Sometimes it's the little things that change everything. For weeks, their bond had grown quietly. Little smiles in the hallway. Shared coffee in the lounge. The occasional story time with Lily, where Victoria found herself sitting cross-legged on the floor beside Will, her expensive skirt wrinkling, her heart oddly light. It was fragile, tentative, almost secret. But secrets have a way of breaking. It happened on a Thursday. The school board had convened a meeting to discuss budget allocations. Victoria attended as a sponsor, her presence commanding the room. She spoke with the precision of someone used to being obeyed, her words sharp and persuasive. But midway through the discussion, one of the board members, a smug man in a gray suit, leaned back and said, "Of course, we're lucky Ms. Hale takes such interest in this little school. Most CEOs prefer to donate and disappear." Victoria smiled politely. "I believe in long-term investment. Education shapes the future." The man smirked. Or maybe you found a more personal reason to linger here. His gaze flicked toward Will, who had been quietly setting up chairs in the back of the room. The implication hung heavy in the air. A few muffled chuckles followed. Victoria's throat tightened. Every eye turned toward her, waiting for her reaction. And in that split second, fear won. She straightened, her voice cool, detached. I assure you, my involvement is entirely professional. I don't mix my work with personal matters. Her eyes avoided Will's. The words sliced through him like glass. He had been standing silently, invisible as always, just doing his job. But the way she said it, the cold dismissal, the denial, made something inside him crumble. She could have brushed it off. She could have defended him, defended them. Instead, she erased him with a single sentence. When the meeting adjourned, Will left without a word. That evening, Victoria found him in the gym, stacking chairs with a stiffness that radiated anger. Will, she began cautiously. He didn't look at her. Don't. You don't have to explain. I do, she insisted, stepping closer. You don't understand what it's like. They watch everything I do, everything I say. If I'd admitted anything. Admitted what? His head snapped up, eyes blazing. That you actually care? That I'm not just some janitor to you? Her silence was louder than any denial. He laughed bitterly, shaking his head. That's what I thought. Victoria's chest tightened. It's not like that. Isn't it? His voice rose, echoing against the gym walls. You live in a penthouse. You wear suits that cost more than my rent. You walk into rooms and everyone listens. Me? I scrub floors. I fix squeaky hinges. I raise my kid one paycheck away from panic. And you, his voice broke. You couldn't even stand up for me in a room full of people with clipboards. Tears stung her eyes, but she forced them back. I was protecting us. No, he snapped. You were protecting you. The words hit like a punch. For the first time in years, Victoria felt powerless. Will, please. But he was already shaking his head, fury and hurt etched deep into his features. Go back to your world, Victoria. You don't belong in mine. And I sure as hell don't belong in yours. The finality in his voice shattered her. That night, Will sat on the edge of his bed, staring at the floor. Lily slept peacefully beside her stuffed rabbit, unaware of the storm tearing through her father's chest. He thought about Victoria's laughter, her softness when she held Lily's hand, the way her eyes had glistened when she spoke of her parents. He had let himself believe, just for a moment, that they could bridge the gap between their worlds. But her silence in that meeting told him everything. He wasn't someone she could claim. Across the city, Victoria stood by her window, the skyline blurring through her tears. She replayed the moment over and over, the smug smirk of the board member, the weight of the room's gaze, her own cowardice. She had built her entire life on strength, control, the refusal to bend. And yet when it mattered most, she had broken. Not for herself. For him. For them. But in her attempt to protect what they had, she had destroyed it. Her reflection in the glass looked like a stranger, polished, powerful, utterly alone. For the first time in her life, she wondered if all her success had been nothing but a gilded cage. The days that followed were suffocating. At the school, Will avoided her. He timed his shifts to miss her visits, kept his head down when their paths crossed, answered her greetings with clipped nods. The warmth that had grown between them vanished, replaced by walls higher than before. Victoria tried, God, she tried. She lingered in the library, where Lily read. She offered coffee in the lounge, left small notes on his cart. But Will never looked at them. Never looked at her. Each rejection chipped at her carefully constructed armor until nothing was left but raw, aching regret. One evening, as she left the school, she saw him outside with Lily. He was helping her ride a second-hand bicycle, running beside her with a grin that melted the shadows from his face. Victoria stood by her car, watching. Lily wobbled, then steadied, pedaling faster. I did it, Daddy, she shouted. Will laughed, breathless and proud. That's my girl. The sight broke her. She wanted to be part of that joy, part of that world. But she had already lost her chance. The distance between them wasn't measured in wealth or class. It was measured in trust, and she had shattered his. That night, in the silence of her penthouse, Victoria whispered into the empty room. "I'm sorry." But no one was there to hear. Have you ever lost something, or someone, because fear made you say the wrong thing? How did it change you? Share in the comments. This is the moment that breaks our hearts. The fallout from the Shatterpoint lingered like smoke after a fire. It clung to the walls of the school, seeped into the silence of empty classrooms, and echoed in the footsteps of two people now circling each other like ghosts. Victoria Hale had never been one to second-guess herself. Decisions came fast, clean, efficient. Her empire was built on it. But now, every moment of hesitation replayed like a cruel highlight reel in her mind. The boardroom. The smug question. Her cold dismissal. "I assure you, my involvement is entirely professional." She hated those words. Hated herself for saying them. In trying to shield herself from vulnerability, she had cut the very lifeline she hadn't known she craved. Meanwhile, Will Carter went through his days on autopilot. Mop, sweep, empty bins, locked doors. His body worked, but his mind wouldn't stop replaying her silence. He wanted to hate her. It would have been easier. But the truth was, he couldn't. He saw her laugh in the teacher's lounge over bitter coffee. He remembered the way she had stroked Lily's hair so gently. He remembered how her voice had cracked when she spoke of her childhood loneliness. He had seen her walls, and what lived behind them. But that didn't erase the sting of her denial. At home, Lily noticed the heaviness in him. "Daddy," she asked one night as they sat on the couch, "why don't you smile as much anymore?" Will forced a grin, ruffling her hair. "I smile plenty, Bug." She pouted. Not like before. The truth lodged in his throat. How could he explain to a 7-year-old that sometimes grown-ups broke their own hearts by being afraid? That night, after she fell asleep, he sat in the dark living room, head in his hands. He had promised himself long ago that he wouldn't let anyone close enough to hurt Lily again. And yet, without meaning to, he had let Victoria in. And she had proven what he feared most, that love wasn't for people like him. Across the city, Victoria sat in her penthouse, wine untouched on the table, her phone heavy in her hand. She had typed out 6 messages to Will, each one backspaced into nothing. "I'm sorry. You mean more than I let on. I was scared." Scared. The word tasted bitter. Fear had ruled her entire life. Fear of weakness, fear of rejection, fear of being unwanted. And now it had stolen from her the one thing that had felt real in years. She thought of Lily's hug, small arms wrapping around her legs as if she belonged. She thought of Will's words, "You don't lose yourself. You find the parts you didn't know were missing." Was she really going to let fear win again? The choice pressed in on both of them, relentless and suffocating. For Will, it came in the form of an invitation. The school was hosting its spring concert, where the children would sing songs for their families. Lily was performing a solo. She begged him to come, of course he would, but then she asked, "Will the nice lady come too?" Will froze. "What lady?" "Miss Hale. She always smiles at me in the library." His chest tightened. He wanted to say yes, wanted to believe it. But the wound was still raw. "I don't know, Bug. She's busy." Lily frowned. "But she makes you smile too." Her words cut deeper than any argument. Out of the mouths of children came the truth adults were too proud to admit. For Victoria, the reckoning came late at night, when she stared at her reflection in the glass. Her empire surrounded her, glittering and untouchable. But it felt hollow without someone to share it with. Without a reason beyond profit margins and market shares. She thought of Will again. The way his voice softened when he said us. The pride in his eyes when he looked at his daughter. The way he saw her, not as a CEO, not as a symbol, but as a woman. And she thought of the choice. Stay in her world of control and isolation, safe but empty. Or risk everything, her pride, her image, her armor, for a chance at something real. For the first time in years, she didn't know the outcome. The night of the spring concert arrived. The auditorium buzzed with chatter, parents filing in with cameras and flowers. Will sat in the second row, Lily beside him in her little white dress, her hair in ribbons. She clutched her sheet music nervously, whispering the lyrics under her breath. Will squeezed her hand. "You'll do great, Bug." But his eyes kept drifting to the door, against his will. Part of him hoped she wouldn't come, spare him the pain of seeing her again. But another part, the foolish part, longed for it. Minutes before the lights dimmed, the doors opened. And there she was. Victoria Hale, stepping into the crowded auditorium, out of place in her tailored coat and polished heels, yet unmistakably present. Her eyes scanned the room until they landed on Will and Lily. Her heart thudded painfully. She had made her choice. But for Will, the moment wasn't simple. When their eyes met, 1,000 emotions collided: longing, anger, fear, hope. He looked away quickly, jaw tight, as though the sight of her burned. Victoria's stomach twisted. She wanted to run to him, to explain, to beg for another chance. But the concert was starting. The children filed onto the stage, voices rising in song. She sat quietly in the back, her hands clenched in her lap, every note of the music pounding like a heartbeat in her chest. When Lily stepped forward for her solo, Victoria leaned forward, breath caught. The little girl sang with trembling courage, her sweet voice filling the room. And in that moment Victoria's vision blurred, not from the song itself, but from the realization that this child, this man, this fragile chance at love, was everything she had been missing. When the concert ended, parents surged forward with hugs and applause. Will scooped Lily into his arms, pride radiating from him. Victoria hovered at the edge of the crowd, fear and hope battling inside her. This was it. The choice. She could walk away again, retreat to her world of power and loneliness. Or she could step forward, risk rejection, risk everything. Her hands trembled. Her throat tightened. But she knew what she had to do. Slowly, she began to walk toward them. When love collides with pride, which should win? Have you ever faced a moment where you had to choose between protecting yourself and opening your heart? Share below. I think this is where we find ourselves too. The spring concert had ended, but for Victoria, the true performance was only just beginning. Parents streamed through the aisles, children squealing with joy, flowers exchanged, cameras flashing. In the middle of the chaos she saw him, Will, crouched beside Lily, fixing the ribbon in her hair, his smile brighter than she'd ever seen it. Her throat tightened. For weeks, she had been running from this moment. But now, her heels clicked softly against the auditorium floor as she moved toward him, every step heavy with fear and hope. Will noticed her before Lily did. His smile faded, replaced by that guarded mask she had grown to hate. He straightened slowly, shifting Lily to his side like a shield. His jaw was set, his shoulders stiff, but his eyes betrayed him. They flickered just for an instant, with something raw and unspoken. Victoria stopped a few feet away, her breath shallow. The crowd bustled around them, but it felt like the world had narrowed to this tiny circle of air between them. "Lily," she said softly, her voice trembling despite her best effort, "you sang beautifully." The little girl beamed. "Thank you. Did you see me?" "I didn't forget the words." "I saw," Victoria whispered, her smile shaky but real. "You were the bravest lion I've ever heard." Lily giggled, clutching her sheet music to her chest. She turned to her father. "Daddy, she heard me." Will's expression softened for his daughter, but when his gaze shifted back to Victoria, it hardened again. "Will," she began, her voice cracking, "I need to talk to you." He looked around at the crowded auditorium. "This isn't the place." "Then where?" she pressed. "Because if I walk away again, I don't think I'll forgive myself." Something in her voice, desperation, sincerity, made him hesitate. For a long moment, he studied her, weighing the risk. Finally, with a sigh, he nodded toward the exit. "Fine. 5 minutes." They stepped into the quiet of the school courtyard, the air cool and laced with the faint scent of spring blossoms. Lily skipped ahead, humming her concert song, leaving them in a fragile silence. Victoria clasped her hands together, forcing herself to meet his eyes. "I owe you an apology." "No, more than that. I owe you the truth." Will crossed his arms, his expression unreadable. "Go on." She swallowed hard. "That night in the boardroom. I was afraid. Not of them. Not of what they thought. Afraid of what it meant, for me, for you. I've built my whole life on control, on never letting anyone close enough to hurt me. And for the first time in years, someone mattered. You mattered. And I panicked." His jaw tightened. "So you erased me." "I erased us," she admitted, tears stinging her eyes. Because if they saw it, then it was real. And if it was real, then I could lose it. And I couldn't bear the thought of losing you, or Lily, before I even had the chance to deserve you. Her voice broke. But I see now that I lost you anyway. The courtyard was silent except for the faint hum of the city beyond the gates. Will stared at her, his chest rising and falling. You don't get it, he said finally, his voice low. I don't need you to be perfect, Victoria. I don't need you to have all the answers. All I needed, just once, was for you to stand beside me. Not above me. Not behind me. Beside me. Tears spilled down her cheeks. I know. And I failed you. He shook his head, anger and sorrow tangled in his tone. Do you know how many nights I told myself people like you don't look twice at people like me? And then you did. You sat with me. You laughed with me. You held my daughter like she mattered to you. And for one insane moment, I believed it. I believed maybe, just maybe, I could be enough. His voice cracked. And then you proved me wrong. The words gutted her. She stepped closer, trembling. No. I was wrong. Not you. You are more than enough, Will. You are the best man I've ever known. You give everything to Lily, to that school, to people who don't even see you. You made me laugh when I'd forgotten how. You made me feel human again. Her breath hitched. I don't care what they think. I don't care about the boardroom or the headlines. I care about you. About Lily. About us. If you'll let me, I'll prove it every day for the rest of my life. Her voice softened to a whisper. But if you can't forgive me, I'll walk away tonight and never ask again. Just know that I'll love you anyway. The silence stretched, heavy with everything unsaid. Will's hands clenched at his sides. His heart warred against his pride, against the scars of every time life had told him he wasn't enough. Then, small footsteps broke the tension. Daddy. Lily tugged at his hand, looking between them with wide eyes. Why are you sad? Miss Hale's here. That means she wants to stay. The innocence in her voice shattered his defenses. Will looked down at his daughter, then back at Victoria, standing there vulnerable, stripped of all her armor, her eyes pleading. And for the first time, he saw not the CEO, not the polished exterior, but the woman underneath. Scared. Brave. Real. Slowly, he exhaled. Damn it, Victoria, he murmured, his voice breaking. You make it impossible to walk away. Her lips parted in a gasp, hope flooding her face. He stepped closer, his hand lifting hesitantly to her cheek. She leaned into his touch like it was the air she'd been starving for. I can't promise this will be easy, he said softly. Our worlds, they don't fit cleanly. I don't want clean, she whispered. I just want real. For the first time in weeks, his mouth curved into a genuine smile. And then, finally, he kissed her. It was gentle at first, almost uncertain, but when she clutched his shirt and pulled him closer, it deepened into something fierce, something healing, something that said we survived the shatter, and we chose each other anyway. When they broke apart, Lily wrinkled her nose. You, Daddy. Both of them laughed, real, unguarded laughter. Victoria knelt, taking Lily's hands. Sweetheart, if it's okay with you, I'd like to be part of your world too. Lily studied her seriously, then broke into a grin. Only if you read me stories. And bring cookies. Victoria laughed through her tears. Deal. That night, as they walked out of the school together, hand in hand, Lily skipping between them, Victoria felt something she hadn't in years. Not control. Not power. Home. Weeks later, the whispers from the boardroom would start again. Questions about the CEO and the janitor, speculation in the papers. But this time, when someone smirked and asked if her interest in the school was personal, Victoria would smile calmly, glance at Will sitting proudly in the front row, and say, yes, it is. And she wouldn't be afraid anymore. Love is never about perfect timing or perfect people, it's about choosing each other, flaws and all. What do you think? Can love truly bridge worlds as different as theirs? Share your thoughts below. I can't wait to read them.
Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as crazier and more intriguing as you can ever imagine. So do check it out. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one.